Hey there folks, Tim Slade here and welcome back to the ATD Ask a Trainer video series. In today's episode, my special guest Megan Torrance and I are answering your questions about xAPI. So stay tuned. I don't know if this is true for you, but I'm really good when it comes to identifying my blind spots. For example, if you told me that my life depended on coding myself out of a paper bag, I'd quickly become a pretty pathetic casualty of that paper bag. In fact, I'll give you another example. I'm one of those people that when someone's talking about xAPI, I smile and I nod and I pretend like I have any idea what they're talking about, even though I don't. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I don't understand what xAPI is on a conceptual level, but I really have no more of a deeper understanding than knowing what SCORM is on a conceptual level. And so that's exactly why I decided to invite Megan Torrance to help me tackle your questions about xAPI. So let's get to it. Hey Megan, thank you so much for joining us for this month's ATD Ask a Trainer episode. For those who maybe don't know you or don't follow you, can you introduce yourself, tell everybody a little bit about what you do, and I'd love for everybody to hear what got you interested in xAPI.
Sure thing. So I'm glad to be here.
Good.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited. So Tim, I'm the CEO and founder at Torrance Learning, and we are a firm that provides everything from learning strategy, design and development, of digital and, well, everything's digital now,
Yeah.
right? Most things are digital. And also custom software and platforms for learning, mostly in the corporate and large organization space. And what got me interested in xAPI, it's a good question.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating. So I got my start in this space in the LMS implementation end of things. And then started working on I'd been trained to do content development, never ended up doing that. Mm-hmm. Started implementing LMSs, and then one of those clients said, "Well, can you build the stuff that goes in these LMS?" I'm like, "Well, sure."
Yeah.
So I've always been on both sides of that, but I started having clients want to get outside their LMS in 2012, 2013, and so this seemed like a really logical space for that to happen.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I'm sitting here smiling and nodding, and I said this in my introduction, and I've said it to you before. I'm really good about knowing my blind spots, and xAPI is one of those things where I have a huge blind spot. I know conceptually what it is, but I really if I had a project that required xAPI, I would not be the person for that project. So I'm so happy you were able to join us today to tackle some questions on xAPI. So are you ready to help tackle some questions?
Let's tackle some questions.
All right.
Bring them on.
Fantastic. Okay, so our first question comes from Milos. I'm not even going to attempt your last name, Milos, so we'll say Milos C. Milos wants to know, how would you explain xAPI to a 5-year-old? And I'm going to add to this question, how would you explain xAPI to Tim Slade or a 5-year-old? Because, pretty much the same level of knowledge at this point.
Okay, so let's start with SCORM. Okay. Admittedly, most 5-year-olds don't know what SCORM is.
That's true.
So we'll start with SCORM. SCORM is awesome. Mm-hmm. It allows e-learning courses to talk to their LMSs. It is global. It is interoperable. Pretty much just works. Mm-hmm. But it's very limited, which is part of why it's global and interoperable and works. Right? SCORM is a vocabulary. It lets me say about 6 things that are interesting to instructional designers.
Can you give some examples? Yeah, you're going. Yep. Go ahead.
Yep. Date, status, complete, your bookmark, mm-hmm. What you scored on the test, and depending on what version, how you answered individual questions.
Right. Yep.
But those are the only things you can say. So to a 5-year-old, those really lame games where when you chat to other avatars, the only thing you can say is from a predefined list.
Exactly.
Of messages. Yep. That's kind of like SCORM. It works for everybody, but nobody gets in trouble, but it's pretty limited.
Got it.
xAPI is when we turn the chat restrictions off, but it's like a grammar. And as long as I follow the grammar, I can say anything I want. So you think of, instead of a SCORM package all wrapped up, right? So we all make zip files and upload them into LMSs, right? xAPI is more like the Lego store. Yes, you can still make, if you're making e-learning, a little zip package and upload it to an LMS. But with xAPI, the data is, we're all following the same structure and pattern, but kind of like a Lego store, where I can go in and I can buy the Death Star kit and make it. Awesome. Or I can go in and buy the Death Star kit and the female scientist, little people, and the city helicopter and the Black Panther ship and make my own thing. Or I can add the robotics to it. I can do all this other thing, and it all works. It's exactly what I want, but all the pieces talk to each other because they all follow that same grammar of the bumps and grooves. And so that's my 5-year-old explanation.
So can you give, obviously with SCORM, I think most people, I'm familiar with this. I think most people are. You can track pass, complete, incomplete, all of those bits of data. And to your point, how somebody might score on an exam or whatever the case might be, right? So that's the vocabulary. When you talk about it being grammar and how you can mix and match different, I assume, pieces of data together to, measure different outcomes. Can you give some examples of like how that, and I'm sure we'll have some questions that get into that a little bit more, but can you give a quick example of how you can get something that's a little bit more nuanced or detailed beyond like passing complete or complete failed?
Absolutely. So if we're in an e-learning context, don't just keep me in an e-learning context. We're gonna get out of e-learning in a minute.
You can do things outside of an e-learning context. I didn't even know that.
Absolutely, right. And that's where, if so, e-learning is. We'll talk about this. But so in an e-learning course, right? Say I'm building a course, and I have this great drag and drop interaction. Awesome, right? The end of the day, we all know that we're not tracking how you did on that drag and drop interaction. Right? We don't get that data. It's not part of the course. We can prevent you from moving ahead until you get it correct and blah, 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 blah. But we don't know how many attempts it took you to do it, where you started, how you ended, those kinds of things. If we have you type your answer to a reflection question into the course, which is one of my favorite ways to engage, right? We never get that data. Right? The learners don't know that. Right? But we never get that data. And with xAPI, we could get that out. So if you make a hint, right, and you give a hint on a screen, we never know if anybody clicks the hint. With xAPI, you can get that data out.
So you can track, if you have 3 drag and drop items, which one they attempted first, what led them to the correct one, if they had to click on the hint. So that like allows you to get way more nuanced, detailed information about that learner's experience through that learning, that course.
Yes, totally.
That's super
right.
Cool.
So it's really, really awesome. And I've seen some really interesting examples of how that gets used. But I made you promise not to keep me in e-learning. So SCORM only works for e-learning. Right. Which means there's tons of other learning tools out there that don't send any data back to the learning management system because the learning management system only speaks SCORM. And so if the concept of complete is irrelevant to a different, a performance support application, then it's not thinking to communicate to your LMS. And so now we have all these big silos. So I've got my flashcard programs, I have my performance support programs, I have my, chatbots, I have my LMS. And in order to find out what somebody's doing, I have to run a report by tool instead of by topic. And with xAPI, all of those sources, we call them data providers, can pool their data. As long as they're all speaking xAPI, I can pull all that data into one database called a learning record store. And then I can start saying, well, did people who engaged with a chatbot do better in the e-learning? Or vice versa? Or did people who aced the e-learning then but zoomed through really fast and never had to struggle hard, do they actually fall down on the job and need to resort to using the performance support more frequently? Or whatever, right? I can then start really making those connections. Ideally, I'm also hooking this into systems of work. Did people who take our training sell more stuff, make fewer errors, answer faster questions, those kinds of things?
That is super cool. I mean, that means then you get to really hone in and optimize on, for example, if you discover during, I'm just making this up, after 2 weeks of training, you find that more people are using the performance support than the formal training, then you can take that data and build for that experience, right? Rather than just assuming that with your learners. I love that. I had no idea that you could pull in, the usage of non e-learning into that data. That is super cool. I love that. Thank you. All right.
Mm-hmm.
That was our first question. Thank you so much, Milos. Hopefully that helps provide some context. I know I definitely learned something I had no idea. All right. Our second question comes from Kimberly Bonilla, I'll go with. I apologize if I got your last name wrong, Kimberly. Kimberly wants to know, what are some examples of how xAPI data can improve the learning or learner experience? I know we just kind of talked a little bit about that, but if you could give some additional examples, I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's three kind of areas in which this happens, right? So one is partly that siloed thing that we talked about, right? So xAPI is going to enable learners and their organizations to keep track of all the different learning and progress and performance that they're doing across multiple systems all in one place.
Yep.
A lot of large organizations actually have multiple LMSs also.
Right. Okay.
And then we have things like, I come out to ATD, I log into ATD, I watch this great video cast, right? And I'm a regular watcher of Ask a Trainer, right? And that information is not fed back to look at my overall job performance.
Okay.
So ideally, right, we'll also have professional associations who can be passing data back and forth about what's going on. This may be a little bit pie in the sky.
Sure.
But from a very, very simple perspective, we're improving the learner experience by being able to track what's going on in all these places so that we have a cohesive picture of what Tim or Kimberly is doing. So that's one.
Okay.
I think an interesting space is around how we can personalize learning based on what's happening in other experiences. So, Tim, you make a piece of e-learning, right? You put it in an LMS, and in that e-learning, you ask somebody, what's your favorite color? And because I say my favorite color is green, you then color all of the buttons in the rest of the course because you have this magic trigger, and it colors everything green. Awesome. I open up my second Tim Slade course, and you know what? Megan, what color would you like everything to be? Green. Right? I have to set that in multiple pieces because the courses can't talk to each other, right? Which is a feature of Storm. With xAPI, I can personalize across e-learning, but also across other experiences. So for example, we built a demo a few years ago. It was kind of fun. You put in your Twitter account, and it went out to Twitter's API, which is not xAPI, but we used a similar function. We went out to Twitter's API, and we could pull in your Twitter image, how many tweets you'd sent, and how many followers you had. And based on that, we decided, are you an absolute newbie? You don't know what Twitter is, meaning we didn't find your account. Are you kind of getting your feet wet? You had fewer than 100 messages and followers and whatnot. Or are you a Twitter rock star?
Sure.
Based on that information, right? So performance in the real world, we then modified the learning experience. Simple branching.
Sure.
If you didn't know what Twitter was, you got module 1 and 2 and 3. Once you knew what Twitter was, you got to skip 1. And so we can personalize that experience based on choices made in other learning experiences or your actual performance.
So you're using other data, anecdotal data that would otherwise just be probably never considered, and you're actually adapting the learning experience based off of that. I love that. So hypothetically then, could you, you talked a moment ago, let me ask this quick question. You mentioned a learning record store. Is that a separate type of platform, or do you find that LMSs or learning experience platforms are starting to incorporate that functionality? Can you give a little bit of detail about learning record stores, and where does that fit into the ecosystem with LMSs and learning experience platforms and all that good stuff?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So Learning Record Store, or LRS, is the official database of xAPI.
Okay.
It is a database, right, that receives, hangs on to, and then gives back when you ask nicely, properly formatted, and properly validated statements. And there's a test for conformance, the whole 9 yards. Okay. A Learning Record Store does not manage learning,
Right.
like a learning management system does,
Yep.
right? So by definition, a learning record store doesn't have to store content.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't even have to know who your users are. It doesn't manage who's supposed to do what, all those things. You can add those things in
Mm-hmm.
on top of a learning record store, or you could have a learning management system that includes a learning record store. And basically, if you think about your big monolithic LMS,
Yep.
it's got a SCORM database in it,
Yep.
and you just kind of nestle in next to it an LRS
Sure.
for your xAPI database, right?
Okay.
Then you're doing both. A learning experience platform would be the same kind of thing. It could either nestle inside, or some LMSs and LXPs point to an external learning record store. So you can get a learning record store that sits alongside your LMS.
Okay.
And the support, so when you're looking at your LMSs, many of them, I'm really excited to see more and more of them saying that they offer xAPI support.
Mm-hmm.
Super cool.
Mm-hmm.
There are different kinds of xAPI support. So, in my personal opinion, best of all worlds, I have a fully functional learning management system with a fully functional LRS inside,
Sure.
which means that anything, including non-e-learning, that happens inside the LMS
Mm-hmm.
is recorded to the LRS, but I can also find out what happens in my mobile performance support app.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
And having that, and so that outside the LMS, that's a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
than some LMSs and some LXPs that can launch and play and record in a very similar to SCORM kind of environment.
Mm-hmm.
xAPI published content.
Got it.
It's not necessarily even recording all the, clicked on a hint or did some, entered text, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those aren't necessarily included. And most of those are not accepting statements from outside of the LMS.
Mm.
Right? So it's a little bit tricky. So here's a cool example. I've got one of our clients is delivering training in multiple different ways and performance support, right? They are delivering an e-learning program via their learning management system,
Mm-hmm.
right? Awesome. They also deliver the same e-learning program via a USB stick. It's not connected to the internet at the time, right?
Okay.
So we actually packed a mini LMS,
Yeah.
a mini web browser, and the course on a USB stick.
Oh, wow.
You take it, you stick it in any machine in the world. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. Right? Any machine in the world, you can run a fully functional Domino flow course.
Oh, wow.
Out of that, it stores all the xAPI data for that on the USB. And when you take that USB back to a computer that has an internet connection, you stick it in, and it says, "Oh, hey, you have internet. Would you like to send it?"
Wow.
That data obviously
Mm-hmm.
comes from outside of the mothership LMS.
Yep.
That data gets fed in, and I can run a single report on both of those experiences. As we add other mobile performance support, dosing calculators and reminders and all these other things to support the same audience, all that data can come back into the same spot in that LMS, because it's a UL LearnShare LMS that has a fully functional LRS inside.
Got
Super
it.
cool.
That is cool. So you could then, going back to, I was really fascinated about how you were talking about creating adaptive learning. When I think of adaptive learning, creating something in Storyline or one of the common e-learning authoring tools, it's usually traditionally the learner has to input their preferences or their experience, and then it adapts off that, or maybe it's a pre-test and then it adapts off that. But then, so could you hypothetically, let's say you have a course, an e-learning course, depending on how many attempts it took somebody to complete a scenario for a given topic, you then could intelligently later on present to them or say, oh, here's some job aids that might better support you based off of how they performed earlier in a course, or vice versa. You find that a particular individual or group of individuals is regularly accessing these series of job aids, and maybe it's an indicator that they need some additional training. You could present that to them and have that all happen automatically.
Absolutely.
That's
And
super
even
cool.
I'll take one more, right? I'll see your job aids
Yeah.
and raise
Blow
you
my
one,
mind.
right? Where if, say, I'm a salesperson
Yeah.
and I'm selling along, you know that I close deals on product A
Yeah.
all the time,
Yeah.
right? You're not going to send me training on product A. You're going to slow me down if you make me take training,
Right.
right? But maybe one day I'm cruising along, and I open up an opportunity for product F. I've never sold product F before.
Sure.
I'm not certified to sell product F. I don't know the nuances of product F as far as we know. And I get pushed learning that is specific to people who've never sold product F before.
Sure.
So I had the opportunity to personalize and adapt the learning, not just on learning data, but on performance data.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's a total shift in the mindset, because I'm even in our conversation, I've forgotten. Yeah, you get all this other data that maybe you would have never had access to that you can use in the delivery and creation of the content. That's fantastic. I love that. Well, I know we went down like a rabbit hole there, but hopefully that answers your question, Kimberly. All right, cool. Our next question comes from Nicholas Marktopoulos. Fantastic name, Nicholas. What's the most demanding task when implementing xAPI statements in order to identify performance gaps? Megan, take that one away.
That's another awesome rabbit hole.
Okay.
Perhaps a shorter conversation here.
Yeah.
So the number one thing is to use a syntax that can be read even if you're not around, you being the instructional designer. Okay. So today, right? I don't know about you, Tim, but when I deliver an e-learning course, I send an email.
Yeah.
I say, here, have it.
Yeah.
And I walk off to the next thing, right? And so some LMS administrator somewhere picks that up, loads that up, and then instantly they can write, they already have reports predefined before I ever showed up and give them that course. They already have reports in their LMS that can tell you all the data there is about that course. Because remember, SCORM, we already know that it's a half a dozen interesting things that you're ever going to get off of that, right? I mean, when I used to deploy LMSs, right, we wrote the 24 reports you were ever going to ever need out of that LMS because we knew the data that you ever had, right? So with xAPI, that is ideal, right? So in this kind of early on stage with xAPI, what I found is that, well, if you're writing something that's e-learning, you can just like, here, take it and pretty much walk away, because the xAPI specification is, and the profile is pretty well buttoned down for things that common things you do in e-learning. That was the easy one, right? Because we're already reporting on e-learning, right? But when we're doing something different, for example, we used e-learning to build a very complex case-based set of test questions for a client. We ran it. The whole experience was delivered in that LMS that has xAPI in it, right? And it's actually the same LMS that the USB one was that other project too, right? So same LMS, right? But in this case, right, we load this all up. We say, great, have a nice life. And we go off to the next project. And then they say, hey, how do I run a report for this? And of course, the LMS company can't answer that question because they've never seen the data before. And and so what we needed to do was to make sure that we were using syntax in our xAPI statements that could be read by anybody and anything.
Got it.
So what you want, so today, right, you can build a course in Storyline, you can build a course in Domino Flow, you can build a course in Captivate, you can build a course in iSpring or Spark Mill or whatever, publish it as SCORM, and it works no matter what, right? It works in the LMS and it reports in the LMS no matter what source you've brought it in. You want the same thing with xAPI.
Got it.
You want to be able to get a video out of Camtasia and Vimeo and iMovie or whatever. Doesn't matter where they came from. You want to be able to report on, when did people pause? When did people close? How much of the video did people watch? Right? Those kinds of things. That requires each one of those tools to be reporting their data using the same syntax. And we call that a profile. So a profile is a set of concepts and ways in which we agree we're going to use xAPI. And there are a few of them are already worked out, but not nearly as many as we would like. So rock solid for video, we're solid for e-learning. Flashcards has been built, some PDF stuff has been built, but it's kind of, if you invent a new kind of learning, also along with it, you need to invent a new kind of data profile.
Got it.
Right?
So
it's interesting work.
Where SCORM is just that universal vocabulary because it's a grammar, going back to what you're describing earlier.
Yep.
You kind of have to provide a little bit of a Rosetta Stone for it to be able to communicate properly and get the data you want. That makes sense. Got it. Okay, cool. Hopefully that answers that question. Nicholas, I'm going to trust what Megan said because it's all Greek to me.
You should always say Tim.
Good. All right. So our next question comes from Jan Sage. Hey, Jan. And Jan wants to know, what's an easy way for someone to get started with xAPI?
So the good news is there's lots of easy ways to get started. A lot of the e-learning authoring tools you already have, so you don't have to buy anything, have a publish to xAPI, or maybe they call it Tin Can, which was the project code name. And so that means that you have something that will already send xAPI data. And I find, so one of the things that our team does is we have this xAPI learning cohort. It's a 12-week experience to learn about xAPI. And e-learning tools are a great place to get your feet wet. Doesn't require any programming. You already own one.
Yep.
You can be in business. You do need to get a learning record store, and all the major learning record store vendors offer free trial versions. So if you want to get started and be able to build a proof of concept, you're good to go. In fact, if you already use SCORM Cloud for testing, which a lot of e-learning developers do, SCORM Cloud has an xAPI component built right in.
Oh, okay.
So they call it SCORM Cloud, but you could call it xAPI Cloud too if you want to. So that's super cool. Now, the thing to note when you do this, right? Say you grab most of your authoring platforms. So definitely like Storyline and Captivate. Right? You're going to go in, you're going to build an e-learning course. You're going to feel really fancy switching that instead of SCORM 1.2 or 2004, you're choosing Tin Can at the end when you hit publish. You throw it up, you point it at your learning record store. And you're going to look at your data and you're going to say, wow, that looks like SCORM. And so because out of the box, those two, right, the ones that most people have, right, those two are going to report very, very SCORM-like stuff.
Okay.
Now, if you're fancy with JavaScript triggers, and you can also, and there's a utility, but since my company created it, I'm not going to mention it.
Okay.
But there is a utility that will do the JavaScript writing for you.
Oh, okay.
If you don't feel like getting into the code, right?
Sure.
But you still have to kind of get in under the hood. Platforms like Smart Builder, like Domino Flow, they already natively, without any code, send data on pretty much anything you want within that.
Okay.
Not everything you want, but pretty much anything you want. You don't have to do anything fancy to get xAPI data out of the individual nitty-gritty things. So that's super cool. There's some other tools that are out of the box xAPI, like ready to rock and roll. xAPI apps. Flip, which is a mobile flashcard app, super cool. Kaltura, their Neuro classroom platform. Alchemer, which used to be Survey Gizmo. Out of the box, they all send xAPI without you having to do any colons or brackets or JavaScript or anything like that.
Good. That's awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Our final question comes from Karthik Richard, and Karthik wants to know, my contacts are being weird. When does it, this is a good one. I'd love to know this. When does it not make sense to use xAPI?
That's a great question. There are a few times when it doesn't make sense to use xAPI, right? So if you are rolling out a great big program, so it's got to be, you're not just testing and fooling around, but you're like rolling out something real, and you don't have a learning record store, and you're not going to get a learning record store, you might as well use SCORM, right? Use your LMS, use your SCORM. If you've got a learning experience, right? An e-learning learning experience. And when you push on your project sponsor, really all they care about is that somebody completed it.
Right.
if that's really all they care about, and they may say, oh, wait, question answers.
Right. Yeah.
Get that, yeah. Right? Those kinds of things you can get out of SCORM. It's not going to be worth your while to push the envelope to get something awesome if they don't care about something awesome, right?
Sure.
So your first xAPI project wants to be something where people can get more than completion data out of it, or people want more than completion data. And unfortunately, our field has had nothing more than completion and question data forever, right? For 20 years, unless you go buy something fancy and separate, right? We've not had that for so long that people don't expect that of us.
Right.
And we don't, we're also not used to dealing with that much data. We haven't had to. Right. So it's a little bit of a shift. The other group are the project sponsors who realize for the first time when you ask this question that you've never been able to get good data. And then they start wondering like we can't do that because marketing gives us great data.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's sometimes it's a surprise for people too.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you want to use xAPI when you want to go beyond just, measuring learner satisfaction or knowledge retention or completion, and you want to do look at data that correlates learning outcomes to performance and business outcomes. Or I would imagine also some of the things you described made me think of maybe you're looking just to improve the learning experience, right? So for example, if people keep clicking that button, but they're not supposed to be clicking that button, it probably means you need to do something to improve that experience, right? You can do all that with xAPI.
Yeah. And we've even for like high stakes experiences, whether it's like publicly available content that's delivered in, to hundreds of thousands of people on any device, or higher stakes testing and things like that. We've used xAPI just for some really, don't tell our team, pedestrian kind of like lockdown and bug fix, right? And so, or troubleshooting, not bug fix, but troubleshooting detection. So those are some of the unfancy ways to use xAPI, but super useful.
That is awesome. Well, hopefully that answers that question, Karthik. And I will say, like I said at the top of the episode, I knew conceptually what xAPI was. I knew it gave you better data, but I know you've opened up my brain completely, blown my mind, and so I have a lot of Googling I'll probably be doing this weekend on xAPI. So, Megan, I thank you so much for joining us for this month's episode. Before we close out, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? And if they want to learn more about xAPI from you, specifically, where can they find all that information?
Awesome. So my email, well, actually, LinkedIn is super easy, right? I'm Megan Torrance on LinkedIn, so that's pretty easy. I'm mtorrance@torrancelearning.com. Via email, it's another good place. But if you want to learn more about xAPI cohort, I would absolutely invite people to come. We offer cohort in the fall and the spring every single year. We've been doing it since 2015.
Oh, wow.
So we've got this, it's from a Learning Geeks perspective, it's pretty awesome to see the growth of this community. We get over 600 people a semester to sign up.
Oh, wow.
And cohort it's free. It's 12 weeks long. It's vendor neutral. So it is vendor supported. Like a lot of the vendors give extended and free trial versions and stuff of their tools, which is super cool. But it's got a weekly webcast. We send people the recordings if you can't show up. And then there's a Slack channel with over 3,000 people in it historically. And we have project teams. So over the 12-week period, people they don't have to, but they can join a project team and make something and have something worth demoing at the end.
That's awesome. And you said it's free.
It's totally free. Yeah.
That's awesome. That is fantastic. Well, is there a URL for that or a website?
Yes. Yep. So it's xapicohort.com. Okay. No punctuation or anything. You get in there, you sign up. The cohort is hosted by a wonderful community builder and instructional designer, Jessica Jackson. And there's just tons of really smart, creative, fun, exploring people. There's some geeks. There's some people who all they know is e-learning authoring, and everything in between. So don't be intimidated at all.
Oh, awesome. Well, we'll put a link to that down in the description. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Megan, for joining us. All right, that's all we have time for in this episode. Of course, I want to thank Megan for joining me to help tackle those really awesome questions about xAPI. As always, I want to send a big thanks to everyone who submitted a question for this month's episode. And if you happen to be watching this on YouTube and you want to get alerted when we publish our next episode of Ask a Trainer, make sure to click that subscribe button below. And of course, make sure to check out the ATD Ask a Trainer advice column by clicking on the link in the description. My name is Tim Slade, and until next time, I'll see you around. Bye.